Okay, our speaker today is Abe Mazliach. Is that how you pronounce it? Yes, Abe Mazliach. We'll be talking about hope and action on the climate front. Matt?
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen? Oh, wait, hold on.
Not your screen. There we go.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce Citizen Climate Lobby and present our goals and hope for the future. Citizen Climate Lobby, CCL, is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, grassroots climate change organization focused on national policies to address climate change. CCL has more than 425 chapters across the country and over 590 active chapters worldwide. CCL has 4 ways for volunteers to take action. First is personal conviction. It provides a wealth of education about climate change so volunteers can make knowledgeable decisions on their own. Path to success. It is a clear roadmap for change. It is focused on building political will for a national solution with global impact. Action opportunities. CCL has a playbook for building political will by meeting regularly with our members of Congress, engaging with the media, and conducting outreach in our local communities. Finally, support. CCL supports volunteers to work together in a collaborative, respectful, and nonpartisan way, and chapter meetings are a place for people to rehearse, share stories, and encourage each other. I'm pretty sure I don't have to spend time here to convince you that climate change is a real problem for the world. I just want to remind you what we're up against. We already are seeing the impact of higher greenhouse gases everywhere. We have more record-setting temperatures, more extreme weather events, rising sea levels that displace low-lying communities, more severe droughts, and an increasing ocean temperatures that destroys coral and makes the ocean more acidic, disrupting delicate ecosystems. And we're experiencing it closer to home. I remember when we had the fires in Northern California last year. I'm sure you do as well. The smoke from those fires began to build up in the Bay Area. The smoke became so thick, we couldn't see the hills from our house in Fremont. You see those hills behind me? It was all orange last year. We didn't leave the house for over a week, and I'm sure you have similar stories. So let's take a quick poll. Where do you stand on climate change?
Okay.
So there's 5 choices, 1 skeptical, and all the way to 5 alarmed. So you see the poll, and please click on your choice. Okay, how are we doing? All right. Two choices. Can everybody see the results of the poll? I'm assuming you can. 33% number 4, which is between concerned and alarmed, and 67% alarmed. So I think I'm talking to the choir here, right?
Right.
Thank you for your responses. So let's do a second poll, which I think is all about what Americans think about climate change. And I probably shouldn't be showing this one. That's cheating, right? Let me go back. Okay, let's go back to the other one. All right, let's do
Results are still up.
I'm sorry. Yeah, the first poll is still up, but I didn't want to show the results of what Americans think. So can we have the second poll?
I don't know if the
So Abe, the second poll is later.
Oh, it's later?
Talking
Okay.
about the options that we are going to do as part of the engagement process.
Okay.
It's a little later, but it's coming. Be ready.
All right. Thank you. So let's compare. Well, we're not doing answers. So this is a poll that was done back in April of 2020, over 1,000 people. And you can see that the majority at that time were concerned, and the next one was alarmed. So I'm sure things have changed since April of 2020, and I'd be curious to see what the new numbers are, but my guess they would be very similar to your answers. So let's move on. What makes a good climate solution? First, it needs to drive large-scale change quickly. The solution has to be big enough to match the scale of the problem. We need to transform the trend line from adding carbon to reducing carbon in the atmosphere. It needs to use incentives to support choice. Let the people choose for themselves with incentives. Third, looks out for those who can least afford rising energy costs. It shouldn't pose a burden to those who are poor or disadvantaged. Fourth, needs to be durable. It should be durable and stick around. It needs sufficient support so that a change in political leadership can't easily overturn an effective policy. And it needs to be healthy for the planet and the economy. It should not only reduce carbon emissions for a healthy climate, but also help create jobs and a robust economy for all. So which approach works the best? I'd like to introduce you to carbon pricing. Carbon pricing curbs carbon pollution by putting a real dollar cost on the negative consequences of climate change. It makes generating carbon cost more, and society will use less of it. It's simple economics. Carbon pricing has already been implemented and has lowered the carbon footprint of countries around the world. CCL's solution is the Energy Innovation and Carbon Act. It's been introduced this year as HR 2307, or Energy Innovation Act for short. As of today, 80 House representatives support HR 2307. There are 132 municipal resolutions endorsing a carbon fee and dividend policy. And it has over 2,400 statements of support and endorsements from prominent community leaders. Maybe the humanist community will consider endorsing the Energy Innovation Act. I hope you think about it and let us know. How does it work? It will drive down Americans' carbon pollution and bring it climate change under control while unleashing America's technical innovation and ingenuity. It puts a fee on carbon. It gives the money back to the households, and it has a carbon border adjustment so that imported goods are subject to the same carbon fee at the border. What are the benefits? Net zero by 2050. This policy will reduce Americans' carbon pollution 50% by 2030 and put us on track to reach net zero by 2050. What does net zero mean? It refers to achieving an overall balance between emissions produced and emissions taken out of the atmosphere. The next benefit is that affordable clean energy. With this policy, the government makes fossil fuels more expensive, and businesses compete to provide clean energy. The resulting innovation will reduce our pollution fast and efficiently, leading to plenty of reliable and affordable clean energy for our lives. It saves lives. This policy will improve health and save 4.5 million American lives over the next 50 years by reducing pollution Americans breathe. And finally, it puts money in your pocket. This policy is affordable for ordinary Americans because it puts money in your pocket. The money collected is given out as a monthly dividend or carbon cashback payment to every American to spend with no restrictions. Most low and middle income people will come out financially ahead or even break even. Let's look at 6 options of where to spend the money acquired from pricing carbon. I'd like you to think about which is best. So are we going to have a poll here, David? Or afterwards?
If you introduce the options, we're very interested in getting your input because it really, really matters because of what's going on in Congress these days. So after Abe talks about these options, then we're going to run a poll. When you say run the poll, I'm ready.
Okay, thank you, David. So let's think about these options, and we're interested in your opinions. First, fund clean energy innovation. America is a great innovator. We could use pricing carbon revenues to put clean energy innovation on steroids. Both progressives and conservatives like it. So there's a good chance it will get support in Congress. 2, invest in green infrastructure. We've heard a lot about infrastructure in the news. This option provides a way to pay for these investments, accelerating our transition to clean energy. We need to make sure that as much of this infrastructure investment is green. Third, remedy environmental and climate injustices. Climate change is impacting the poor and marginalized more than anyone else in our society. This option would prioritize improving their lives and safeguarding them. 4, pay down public debt that we pass on to our children and grandchildren. It now totals about $28 trillion. Not surprisingly, traditional conservatives have championed this cause. 5, reduce personal and corporate taxes. This option uses the proceeds to reduce taxes. It has successfully been implemented in British Columbia, Canada. This option appeals to traditional conservatives because it's revenue neutral and doesn't grow government. And finally, number 6, return monthly dividend checks to citizens. In this option, the government doesn't keep the money. It divides up the revenues and sends out equal monthly dividend checks to every American citizen. Every American citizen becomes a shareholder in fixing the climate. In this scheme, lower and middle Americans are unaffected by rising fuel prices or actually come out ahead financially. This option is the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act that CCL has introduced. So let's vote. Can we do a quick poll? So you have all 6 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Please vote for which one you believe is the best solution for what we do with the funds we get by pricing carbon. Has everybody had a chance to put in your poll? All right, well, maybe we should go ahead and see what the results are, David. All right, everybody see this? Let's look at the top 2. Invest in green infrastructure, and that's 57%, and 29% return monthly dividend checks to each citizen. So maybe after my presentation, we can talk about this a little bit and see why you've chosen these 2 approaches. And there's only actually 3 that's been picked. The third one is funding clean energy innovation. So thank you for providing this information, and we can talk about it after the presentation. Why am I so passionate about climate change? My father and mother, Leon and Lola, survived the Holocaust during World War II. Leon was born in Salonika, Greece, and Lola was born in Szuzlowicz, Poland. Leon survived the Auschwitz death camp, the Warsaw Ghetto, and a death march from Poland to Germany. Lola volunteered to go to a work camp to save her family, but unfortunately they were all murdered. She ended up at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. After they were liberated by the American soldiers, they were taken to a displaced person camp in Feldafing, Germany. I was born in the Feldafing displaced persons camp, and we came to the United States as refugees in 1950. I know what you're thinking. What does my family Holocaust history have anything to do with climate change? I've thought about my parents' experience and the Holocaust throughout my life. Who am I? How could something like this happen? Why did it happen? And can it happen again? Today, unfortunately, I see very disturbing similarities between then and now. During World War II, most countries were indifferent to the plight of Jews and other people in Europe. This is probably not surprising to you. Many people thought that this wasn't their problem. It was somebody else's problem. It was too big of a problem. How can anybody do anything? How do you fight the Nazis? I think we're seeing similar responses with regard to solving climate change. It's not my problem. It's not affecting me. I look out the window right now and it's clear. Why worry about it? It's too big of a problem. How can I do anything? But we can't afford to be bystanders. Each of us can make a difference. Let's be upstanders. It's time for us to be upstanders, not bystanders. How can we do this? Learn about the Energy Innovation Act. There's the link on the screen. It's pretty easy, energyinnovationact.org. Act locally. Talk to your friends and neighbors about climate change. Share what you know. Ask them for their thoughts. We need to break the spiral of silence and help each other to speak up and take action. Advocate for an effective national policy by writing and calling your congressman. Get your city council to endorse the Energy Innovation Act. Thank you very much. So do we want to go to questions and answers? Or do we have another poll, David?
So we do have another poll, and it's just a rerun of the poll that you just participated in. And the personal preferences are really important. And what you're showing is very similar to what we've seen by other members of our community in the Bay Area, who are mostly alarmed and concerned. This second poll will give you this chance to weigh in on what you think most of the American people will buy in, not personally what you will buy in, but we will gain a share of support from the largest number of people across this country, because this is a national legislation. So I'm going to run this poll and think for a minute, what would be the best option so that we can marshal support by the American people. Okay, here we go.
So this is what we think the American people will choose.
Probably the chicks.
Okay. Do we have everybody's input? Okay. Interesting. Well, okay, I like this. Returning monthly dividend checks to each citizen, 63%. Woo! And then the next one is investing in green infrastructure, 25%. And finally, reducing personal and corporate income taxes, 13%. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate you listening to our talk, and I'm going to turn it back over to Ray.
I think Alex is running the Q&A.
Oh, Alex, okay.
Whenever he unmutes himself.
You're
Not
still
sure
talking mute.
I'm not sure what's going on, Alex. Can you unmute yourself? I asked him, click the button. There we go.
Okay, if you have a question or want to make a comment, you can raise your hand. There's a raise hand icon. I thought there was one at the bottom of the participant window. There's one at the bottom of my,
Yeah, there is under reactions.
there we are, reactions. Click on, if you've got a reactions icon at the bottom of your screen, when you move your cursor down there, you can raise your hand if you have a question or comment to make. There we go. So Roy and Susan, you had a comment. You want to unmute yourselves? Or can I do that?
You can't unmute?
I can. That's the one.
Do you know sign languages?
No.
There you go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Can you put up that poll again? And I wanted to ask a question about it. Just, can you
The last
just
one?
it?
The left?
Yeah, yeah.
Going to relaunch the poll, but you don't have to fill it out.
Yeah, just to display it.
Um,
Is it possible?
yeah, I just have to click in here and go somehow stop sharing. And let's see. Is this, can you see?
Yeah,
this?
that looks good. That looks good. Okay, I just, I'm trying to understand the difference between the first and the second one. Funding clean and investing in green infrastructure. It looks like a fine difference, but I don't know. Maybe not.
So Abe, do you want me to?
Yeah, so I'll give it a shot. The first one, funding clean energy innovation. This is putting the money directly into building new technologies and innovation, having people do R&D and solely try to come up with new approaches to provide energy without impacting the environment. Number two, investing in green infrastructure is putting money into what we have already. We've got the infrastructure bill in place in Congress that they're gonna vote on, and it's to build roads, to correct things that have gotten really old in this country. But the idea here is to make sure whatever's being invested is green, that money is not spent for new coal plants or new power supply. So there is, they're both pretty close. Did I give you a?
Well, yeah, I think Greg just put something up. Hold on, let me see what he said. A whole big long thing. It obsoletes existing clean energy innovation and gives incentive to delayed deployment. Deployment is urgent now. Oh, I was wondering if when you do those, put that poll, that you could have a little note after each, something of this sort to explain it a little bit in the future. It's just because I didn't get it until Greg just said it.
Okay, thank you. Well,
Just a suggestion. I just didn't get it. So, okay.
I just want to jump in and say that we put up the poll at the last minute. I had to enter all this stuff in quickly right before the meeting, so if it didn't have quite enough info, I'm sorry about that, but we did what we could.
And that's fine.
Right, Dana and Jerry, you had a comment. One of you had. If you want to unmute yourself. You're still muted. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I had kind of an immediate reaction to that word innovation. And I thought, whoops, there goes some more money to the tech boys. And I had a stronger feeling toward the second one, because I thought that will not only be concrete places that are producing green things, but it will give jobs to people that need jobs. And you know, this country's going more and more in the direction of, if you have a fabulous education and technology, you can make endless amounts of money and build a huge house in Silicon Valley. And I would much rather have that money go to regular people.
Thank you. Great answer.
Okay, Ray, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. I'd just like to say thank you for your talk. It's very informative. And I would like to be able to contact both you and David later. So if you could put your email in the chat, that would be appreciated.
Sure. Be happy to do that. Thank you.
All right. Carl? No, you're still mute.
Shoot, I'm sorry. I forgot. So between your first poll and your second poll, there was a shift in the responses strongly towards giving money back to people. And it's not clear to me. I understand that it gives people a positive reinforcement for the program, but I don't understand how that is going to help climate change. So, you know, in other words, it seems like it's kind of off the wall. I don't know why people changed their minds from the first one to the second one, but it seems to me that I don't have prejudice against innovation, because what happens is Susan believes innovation only takes place in the software. And actually, there's a lot of hardware innovation going on right now, and most of it's not concentrated in Silicon Valley. And, you know, like this supposed carbon sequestration and all this other kind of stuff. This is a civil engineering problem, not a software problem or electronic engineering problem, although there might be some contributes in there too. That will be driven strongly by public opinion. I think it's more important that we find new ways to do things that are innovative in other areas which we're not familiar with. And again, that's my opinion, pretty strongly so, because giving money back to people may make them feel good. And that may be an interesting thing, but we should give money to people anyway, regardless of the money coming in from this thing. But anyway, David has his hand up and I will shut up.
Let me just weigh in a little bit with a few thoughts. And this is Carl made a really good observation. One of the issues with raising the price is reflected in what happened in France. Have many of you heard about the Yellow Vest movement? Macron the Prime Minister and President France have put a carbon tax on, and it just exploded. It was essentially a socially unstable, politically unstable event. And so that was a learning experience, not only for France, but for the rest of the world. The two parts to climate change as a solution. One is the action, and in this case, the prime mover is putting a price on carbon. And it's economy-wide because it filters up not only through the oil companies and the coal companies and so on. It basically percolates the whole economy. And if it's gradually increasing prices, we propose, it doesn't wreck the economy, and the economy dynamically adjusts. It's very powerful in dropping our emissions as a nation. It is the most effective tool, it's almost like a hammer, to bring our emissions under control. The second part is political sustainability of the policy. So there's much that government can do. And in fact, the current administration is putting maximum effort at the federal government level to take action on climate change. What's not happening is getting people involved. The thing about returning to the money to the people is that some people come out ahead, some people don't. People who don't come out ahead are generally the wealthy, who have much higher carbon footprints. They take trips on airplanes, they have expensive lifestyles. And so what this does, it's bringing carbon pricing into play, but protecting the middle and lower class. The other thing, and that it goes to the idea that Abe was talking about, everybody is an equal shareholder in solving this problem. But there's one thing that's particularly important that he said. It says it's sticky. And what he means by that, when the money comes to the American people, no politician's going to mess with it. Nobody's going to take action to essentially corrode our national effort by saying all of a sudden we're going to take money out of people's pockets and spend it on something else. Or if the economy takes a dip, what happens is the politicians try to work around it. In this case, we have a policy in place that will take us clear off to 2050. Having said that, all of what you said, Carl, makes sense as well. But political sustainability is critical to solving the problem. This isn't something for the Biden administration. This is going to have to be stable for 20, 30 years to get the job done.
Okay, Zem, you had your hand up. You want to, can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Perfect. Yeah, I would just like to add on to what David just said. He kind of beat me to the punch. I believe the option of giving essentially a refund to all the citizens is a bad idea because it makes said citizens essentially shareholders in the carbon producing industry. They have an incentive of never allowing these industries to be reformed because their revenue stream will be affected by it. They need the carbon to be emitted moving forward so they can get these refund checks. So I think the idea there creates a really bad incentive structure.
Good point.
Dave, you want to respond?
So I'm not completely sure I understand it. It certainly brings people into play in addressing climate change to augment what government is trying to do. Government only represents maybe a third of the economy in terms of its ability to influence things. And by making everybody a shareholder, it's not a shareholder in the fossil fuel companies. It's a shareholder in a national effort to solve the problem. So that we all have a stake. And in fact, we all do in solving climate change. And getting that monthly check is a reminder that our effort to deal with climate change is working. It's symbolic. It's not it actively makes us all complicit with the oil companies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the comment here is that it creates a situation where we're incentivizing the industry to reduce its carbon footprint
Yes.
because it's paying that money to the citizens, but the citizens would rather get the money perhaps than
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what's happening today is we're in the process, I believe, of implementing what's called clean electricity standards. And we're going to be sending billions and billions of dollars to the utilities. Some could say these are enabling utilities to get their act cleaned up. And in fact, it's a bribe. They should be doing it anyway. And this is different because the money goes right to the people and protects those who will be harmed by the rising prices.
it certainly makes it much easier to get the bill through Congress, I would think.
Right.
Okay. Again, Dana and Jerry, you got your hand up? You want to unmute?
Yeah, it seems to me as though the number one thing that should be done is to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies. Where does CCL stand on that?
We're all for it. but it isn't, that's a start. If we eliminated the subsidies, it would be what we call leveling the playing field. Leveling the playing field. But the economic modeling shows that that's not going to come near close to solving the problem. But it's a necessary step for sure.
Oh yeah, I believe it's not enough. The thing is, it seems to, I could be wrong, but it seems to me as though it ought to be easier to eliminate subsidies than to impose this carbon tax.
Yeah, it's a much easier lift, I believe, and I think the political winds are, at the back pushing for this. But the net impact of limiting the subsidies is, in terms of reducing emissions, isn't, most of the studies show that its impact is trivial.
That may be, but it would certainly take money away from fossil fuel industries, which ought to tip the power balance. It just seems to me as though if from a political perspective, I'd start with eliminating the subsidies before the carbon tax, just because it seems like it should be easier.
Yeah, I think it was true. If we hadn't procrastinated for 20 years on solving this problem, that would be a very good big step, because the message that sends is tremendous. However, that's not enough, because we probably have 5 years to put something that will really solve the problem in place. It's almost too late to say that eliminating the subsidies is going to do the job.
Some people are arguing it's already too late because the Arctic sea ice is melting and changing the with a positive feedback loop, which is causing us to get more energy from space, and so it's all hopeless. And I remember one of the words at the beginning was about hope.
That's right. That's the title of the presentation.
It is possible, based on economic models, that if we act in the next few years to put a substantial national policy in place with incentives for other countries, we can still do it. We can still do it. And we, I could share some of the studies that show that this is possible. And it's pretty compelling that it's not too late and that there is hope And in fact, that there are 4 bills just like the ones that Abe mentioned pending in Congress with a lot of support. We just have to push it across the line. And our efforts as citizens to get in the face of the members of Congress to do what they need to do is critical for realizing that hope. It's right in front of us.
Okay, Ray, you had another comment you want to make? You want to lower your,
Yeah, I've got a question on the whole carbon tax and returning the money to the people. I'm wondering what effect you think this will have on making the fossil fuel companies less viable, in that their profits are not going to go down because they'll just add the tax onto the price of their product, which you've already alluded to. Prices will go up at the pump and people will have the money to pay those increased prices. But that seems to me that there's no disincentive to the fossil fuel companies based on this. So how does it help?
Right. So what happens is it suppresses demand. And so if we bring the price up to $100 a ton of carbon coming out of the gas pump, it's going to suppress the demand for fossil fuels across the board. Now, the second
But isn't if you raise continually, I understand the principle of over time making the carbon tax higher and higher, and the price at the pump goes higher and higher, and the subsidies people receive to pay that higher price goes up and up, and it just spirals up. But again, the fossil fuel companies don't have to reduce their profits because they can just charge more.
what matters
Because people have money to pay more. So it's an inflationary move more than a environmental move.
So this is a good, so Ray, you're making a good point. The signal that this sends to Wall Street. Now, there's a bigger part of our economy. Some would say it's a capitalistic economy, and it shouldn't be a capitalistic economy. But the very fact that these prices are on a predictable price of going up, these pricing carbon pollution, is going to be devastating to the fossil fuel industry. And you can already see it. You can already see it. So I wouldn't say that the fossil fuel companies are in a place to arbitrarily just pass on all this to people without impact, because both on the demand and on Wall Street, it's going to be devastating.
So I think there's an additional thing that I've learned is that it's going to create competition. It's going to force these companies to spend their money on technologies that improve the climate.
Right.
And as we know right now, Biden 2 days ago laid out a plan that 50% of all vehicles produced will be electric by 2030. So this is moving in that direction anyway, but this will encourage these companies to realize that they have to do something and work harder at getting to the point that the American people want them to get to.
And just to go back on what Abe said, GM is not going to sell any gasoline automobiles or fossil fueled automobiles by 2035. So I don't know what Chevron and Exxon are going to be selling to, because they see the writing on the wall for all of these reasons. Because nobody is going to be buying gas. There's going to be a dramatic shift, we hope, towards clean electric vehicles.
okay, Carl, you had your hand up again?
Oh, yeah. I guess I think Celso had his hand up before me, but I'm willing to let him go if he wants, or, well, I'll just make my comment. It's a short one. I've been to a number of engineering presentations about the fact that many of these bills do not include the total cost the total environmental cost of producing, say, as an example, a solar cell or a windmill or whatever, where you have to include the cost to extract the stuff that you need from the ground, the cost to produce the various components, etc. Because, we're not going, well, I don't know. I'm just wondering, when these bills are put up there, are they taking the real cost in mind, or just enhancing various industries to become more profitable, even if their solutions don't lead to a reduction in emissions? Just curious.
So there is no I would say that's a good question. The cost of extracting lithium to make batteries for electric cars and the associated environmental damage. In fact, we may be starting a huge lithium mine in Nevada to provide materials for these batteries. So it is a substantial consideration. And Carl, you're absolutely right. That's something that needs to be factored in. But there's nothing dirtier and more damaging to the climate than pulling fossil fuels out of the ground. So I won't say that it's squeaky clean, but it's dramatically better. And that's, the options, taking the clean energy options with its pollution along with the ride is probably something we must do.
Great, Salsa, you have had your hand up a couple times. Want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I see that Zem has his hand up, and my comment was just to reinforce his point that the dividend to the public is really a disincentive to solving the climate problem. Because imagine if the problem was really solved, the dividend would be zero, and the public would not be happy with that.
They won't be paying for higher gas either.
If of course the problem is solved and people are mad about the fact that the dividend isn't coming anymore, which
Exactly.
it goes up to $600 billion a year, probably in 10 years in total revenues in the United States. Then it slowly tapers off. But if I had to pick solving the problem as opposed to people being mad that the checks don't arrive, we'll solve the problem any day.
It sounds complicated. Sim, did you want to make another comment?
Yes. My question is, how do you incentivize other countries to reduce their carbon footprint, especially developing countries like China, who have a strong disincentive? Their incentive is to grow their industrial production by as much as they can because it buys the communist regime political stability. So I really don't see them acting on climate change at all. So how would you address that?
Yeah, actually, it's very interesting. And I would say that before talking too much about this, China is a very significant adversary, but not an enemy. Not an enemy. They're an adversary. And they have problems as well. One of the factors in there, if you sort of dig under the surface of China, is they have centralized planning, but in fact, many of the areas of as far as industry policy goes is distributed into, I guess, what you call the provinces of China. And so that for instance, the Communist Party tried to restrict the amount of coal that's being produced by laying down an edict that coal miners could only work 30 hours a week. It didn't work. So, but back to your question, the way of doing this and being fair to our own industry and our own economy is to put what's called a Border Adjustment Act. Effectively, it's a tariff. And effectively, Europe and Canada, which are both have pricing carbon in, are about to put a carbon tariff on the United States. Absolutely true. So if we enact a carbon price, then the World Trade Organization indicates that it would be, according to the current rules, appropriate and allowed under the current trading policies for to tax those countries, put a tariff, who are doing their share about climate change. And that would include China. So the third leg of this thing that we didn't want to get into the details, but it's a very good question. What about China? Is you put a border adjustment. And so the money is taken out of their industries, let's say steel products or aluminum products are manufactured in China, and they're given to our companies. It goes into a special fund. Hope that answers.
You're on mute, Alex.
No one knows that. Roy, Susan.
Hi.
Yes.
Yeah, I keep thinking, this is such a complex subject. I'm going crazy, but that's part of this. But my most recent personal experience last year was the introduction of Toyota's RAV4 Prime, which is a plug-in hybrid car. And that product, it has incentives. Like $12,000 or something like that off the price in credits. That's actually a very strong incentive for personal people like me. Like I was very interested in getting a car like that had, it was a good car, but it did still have a little bit of the gas usage because I don't feel totally comfortable with dropping to electric only at this time. The federal and the state subsidies are very large on that kind of a car. Having a dividend for me is sort of like, I hardly see it, I just, I think you had an example of how much it would be per person or something. And, you just don't see it much. But when you have big bulk things like that, like big credits for investing in clean energy type vehicles or whatever, solar power, etc. Those are big. And I don't know, maybe I'm sort of confused, but that's how I think people react. Toyota was sold out on that car. You can't even get it. I can't get it last year or this year because of, the waiting list on it, because of its, and I think it has to do with a lot of the incentive parts. Just my personal.
Yeah, I think incentives are important, but they are targeted at specific things. For instance, the problem that we have isn't just transportation, although that's a large part of it. Most of it is built into our homes, the way we drive, our whole lifestyle. So targeted incentives on automobiles is part of it. But what about conservation? What about not driving as much? What about riding a bicycle? What about putting more insulation in your house? One of the most effective ways that we can address climate change is by using less energy. So putting incentive on a car doesn't do anything about that, although I admit that that's important. But putting a price on carbon will drive conservation and energy efficiency, right? Maybe I should be taking more public transportation. There's a myriad of ways that people will adjust, and that's what the economic science tells us really works. And I can point you, there's public domain economic models that you can use to try all these ideas out. And the main thing that works is a carbon price, and the main thing that worked to make it politically sustainable is not the government keeping the money, but it goes back to the people.
Well, I don't think, I was just implying that the incentive for the cars. I grew up in a world where my mother says, don't leave a room without turning the light off. And, the whole recyclable stuff that's going on right now is pervasive. I mean, there, except for certain people, I have neighbors and friends that say, why do I care? But I do care, and I do implement those things in addition to looking for good savings on a vehicle. I can't entirely avoid using a car. I have a disabled person that I have to have come with me, and it doesn't work well with a bicycle. I understand the usage of the car, but public transportation is not the most conducive to a lot of people. I grew up also in San Francisco using primarily public. I use the buses. I know every bus line in San Francisco because of the way I grew up there. My mother never drove. So all of those things, are in the back of my mind, and I just live with it. Many people don't.
I just want to jump in and say the quality of this discussion is amazing. I really enjoy and appreciate all of the input that you've been giving us. And yeah, I mean, this is a really high level conversation we're having here. And there's room for everything that everybody said, because indeed, this is a wicked problem. I posted something about wicked problems. And it's at the same time, it's an existential problem as well. So really wonderful input.
I also appreciate all the feedback. I've learned a lot from you.
Alex, you're muted again.
Yeah, okay. I want to thank Greg, who regularly has a lot of sites to post in our chat line. You might want to look through those. Got a week's worth of sites you might want to check out. Thank you, Greg.
You're going to make us read all weekend.
Yes.
We don't have anybody else with their hands up. Do we want to go to general discussion?
It's probably a good idea.
Okay, everybody should be able to unmute yourselves, and we can do general discussion. Just jump right in.
So how many chapters are there within your organizations across the country?
I don't think any of us know.
A lot, right?
We have the American Humanist Association, and if you were to go online and check them out, they'd probably tell you. Or Gray has just posted. No, that's Solutions. Okay. I don't know. Lots.
Lots. Okay, I like lots.
Yeah.
That's a good answer. Thank you.
Have a good magazine too.
Ray, you're on mute.
Thank you. One of the things that concerns me about climate change is more and more everybody's talking about it, and they're talking about steps to move in the right direction. And that's all well and good, but I think that based on the article I read yesterday, which was the first item in the chat, we don't have time for steps in the right direction. We need to come up with a solution, something that's going to solve the problem in short order. And I don't hear anybody talking about that, because, we're talking about, I've heard in this talk, reducing emissions. Well, that's all well and good, but reducing emissions to zero even isn't going to solve the problem. We need to get to net negative, and we need to do it quickly. And we keep talking about net zero. And if you read this article in the Atlantic, there's enough greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to make the planet uninhabitable to most of the current life on the planet.
Well, I'm going to reply, as you saw on the end of my presentation, that I'm compassionate about it because of the history of my family. But realistically, you've got to deal with what we have. We have very powerful corporations in a so-called capitalistic society that you can't just say, I'm turning off the light on you guys. We've got to work very hard, unless we want to become a dictatorship, to get and force these companies to reduce their impact on climate change. So that's why I'm part of this organization, because I feel it's, once this act passes, I think it's one of the best ways on a national, international basis to reduce carbon as fast as possible.
So one other suggestion I would have is to approach it from the other direction. And investing in new technology, is one of the things we can do. And we have technology that can produce a lot of clean energy. And if we can get to the point where people realize that overall energy consumption on the planet is going to continue to increase because of all the developing countries. They're not going to sit back in their third world status forever. They want to develop to where the US is, to where China is, to where most of Europe is. And so energy increase is going to continue to increase. So what if we came up with a plan to provide enough clean energy to support that increase? And at that point, fossil fuels would go away.
Let me jump in and say that that's a wonderful comment. And China is capitalizing that big time because they are dominating the clean energy technology market from the standpoint of supply. And so they are going to be in the catbird seat to help other countries make that transition. Now, it's also, they're selling a lot of coal plants, but they are absolutely a decade ahead of us or more in being able to bring these third world countries up and not have to go to the heavy fossil fuels lifestyle that we've inherited from the last century. China's
I think if you look at the statistics, China is implementing more clean energy in terms of gigawatt hours generated than any other country on the planet right now.
That is true. And that's our challenge, to be relevant in this competition as not an enemy, but an adversary.
At the post in the
I thought
chat,
adversary was not much different from enemy.
yeah, I'm looking to at what David posted in the chat about a quote from the senior advisor to Obama. And he makes sort of the distinction that we could mitigate, adopt, or suffer, right? And I'm definitely not one for suffering, but I'm wondering if mitigation is too late, if we're not already too late, and we should move to adaptation.
Well, adaptation is climate change is trying to run away from a bear. And if we try to adapt by having bigger and more powerful air conditioners, I can assure you we're going to lose. Or building seawalls, we're going to lose. So adaptation is absolutely necessary, but absolutely insufficient. If we don't mitigate and at least get to carbon neutral, then think about and doing some adaptation to protect the people who are vulnerable in the way, and thinking about geoengineering. But if we don't get to zero, we simply won't outrun the bear.
I guess part of what you're saying is that adaptation is a lot more expensive than mitigation.
Well, I think that you will never be able to adapt fast enough. And it's not just people, it's the whole ecosystem. If you think about what's happening. And there's going to be a big report coming out by the International Panel on Climate Change. Look to see that news. It's going to be published tomorrow. It's the latest assessment. It's going to be huge. And it's going to be absolutely clear that we have to mitigate and that adaptation isn't going to do the job. However, you have to keep those two things, from an economic analysis, they are tied at the hip because there are people going to suffer while we try to mitigate it. But we don't mitigate, it's hopeless.
Yeah, I think one of the problems we see with the forest fires makes me wonder if the problem is that the flora, the plant life we have in California is no longer suitable to the environment. The whole environment and the whole flora have to change, have to adapt.
We're about to lose California as a major agricultural entity, which is one of the world's world-class area to grow food, vegetables, everything else. It's on the bubble. It's very possible that in 10 years, agriculture, will still be around, but it's simply going to be impossible to raise food, to grow food in California. And we can't adapt around that. It's a lost asset to the world.
Wait a minute, David. Let's go back to hope. I'm starting to get a little depressed here. Let's go back to hope. Sorry, David.
What is the status or what are the possibilities for extracting carbon from the atmosphere? I keep thinking you want to grow a lot of trees and then cut them down and bury them and grow more trees.
Yeah, so there's a whole technology that's evolving, and some people say, some Republicans have come around in Congress to plant 1 trillion trees. And that you just sort of say, well, how much impact is that going to have? If you look at some of these models, and I posted one of them, that you can play around with all these ideas we've been talking about. If you have these sliders and you can just slide in the different parts of the solution, you'll see what happens. Planting trees does zip, just doesn't that effective. And there's a number of other things, like maybe we should all start building nuclear plants. Well, unfortunately, it's too late. But there's one thing that you can show.
I have to disagree with that.
No surprise.
Yeah. I used to run nuclear plants, by the way. So I can tell you, it just takes too long to build them. And yes, there is a 4th generation nuclear, but we'll never build them in this country unless and until people are more afraid of climate change than they are of nuclear plants. And by then it's going to be too late. That's the rule of that. But you can play around with these tools. But the thing that really drops it, and I could almost show you live, is putting a price on carbon, because it's economy wide, and it just brings down the emissions dramatically. Then you can add other things around, like innovation, maybe nuclear plants, maybe incentives for people to buy Toyota products. All of that's good. But if you don't put a price on carbon, then we don't have a lot of hope.
Do you have, you were saying there's studies on the effect of these. Do you have those online somewhere?
So let me show you something.
Okay.
Let's see. I put a link here. And this is a publicly available tool. Whoops. The technical term, it's a meta-analytic tool. So what it is it's sort of a roll-up of many, many climate models or economic models. What's happened is people have linked big time economic models with climate models and see how they work together. And I don't know, how many of you know who William Nordhaus is? He won the Nobel Prize in economics, largely for bringing and coupling together an economic model to the climate model so we could begin to do policy. Well, in any case, this is a roll up of some of those models. So you can put nuclear in, you can put economic growth, and you can use these sliders, and you can take courses on how to run it. But it's a really good way to get an idea of what really is going to make the difference. What really is going to make a difference. And you see down in the lower left, what happens if you were to put a carbon price. There's nothing like it. That's not a silver bullet. But
What happens if you slide nuclear to the right?
Let's do that. And you could slide them all. There, we did it. Did you see it? It's hard to see. Deforestation, we can slide all those things over and see what planting a tree is.
I played around with this a little bit. If you try carbon removal technological, I think that makes a big difference as well.
This is fun, and so I invite you to do it. There's another model called Resources for the Future that's just like this one, a little bit harder to use. And
Would you put that URL in the chat?
I put the link in chat.
Okay.
And so I'm going to stop sharing, but it would put a floor under a lot of the things we talk about, and it's really helpful. I've used it for problem solving myself, and then I say, how has the model come out this? And I think about it. I say, oh yeah, that's the reason. That's the reason. Anyway, interesting.
Do we have your contact information in the chat?
Contact information in the chat. I'd love to follow up with you. I mean, since I retired, I've spent a lot of time in thinking about climate change, and thinking about climate solution is just fascinating. Just fascinating.
So we put our email addresses on the chat.
Yep.
We can do it again if you want.
Oh, you did put your email address. It's great. Thank you.
And there's a what we call CCL community, which of course you have to join CCL, but you can just join CCL, and there's just a tremendous amount of people who are debating, and they have forums and all this stuff. It's just an amazing source of information, above and beyond what we're talking about here. That if you want to just dig into this stuff, there's just a tremendous resource for you, and I'll try to put that in the chat too.